Hello, good day everyone. So welcome to our lecture number 2 for GNED 06, Science, Technology, and the Society. For lecture number 2, we're going to talk about science and technology in the Philippines. So this one is in the Philippines setting. Let's go over our objectives first. So for our first objective, describe how science and technology in the Philippines has evolved over time. Number 2, identify the influence of colonization to the science and technology in the country. And number 3, describe the huge role of education in the development of Philippine science and technology. So I have here a picture and a specific date, a specific year, which is 1521, because we have been under the influence of the Spaniard or the Spanish colonization for more or less 300 years. 300 years, meaning to say, if we have been under the Spanish colonization or the Spaniard colonization for 300 years, they have made a great impact to our culture, tradition, who we are as a Filipino, what we are as a country. So they have impacted us the most compared to Americans, Japanese colonization. So some of those impacts, we have some archaeological findings. We have here the Manunggul jar. So the Manunggul jar was a burial jar in Manunggul Cave of the Tabon Caves at Lipoon Point in Palawan. So the story behind this is you have the ash of the deceased inside, and then on top, covering the jar, you have here a boat. So probably this one is the deceased person, and then that is accompanying that deceased person or that deceased loved one towards the next chapter or towards the next life. Then we also have the Laguna copper plate inscription, and this one is the most famous one. You have discussed this or tackled this when you were in probably elementary or high school. The balangay or the buluan balangay, balangay boat, mother boat. Okay, the origin of the word barangay that we are still using nowadays. So those are under archaeological findings. And then Filipinos during the Spanish regime were considered as early traders because majority of the market happens between trading an item to another item. So considered as early traders. And then we also have old narratives from first Spanish missionaries because besides the culture, tradition, beliefs, one of the biggest contribution of the Spaniards here in the Philippines is religion, which is Catholicism. So old narratives from first Spanish missionaries, probably in the form of the Bible, prayer books, okay, the ones that we use for novena or when we pray the rosary, those are considered as old narratives. Then we have here the barangay, coming from the word balangay or boat, mother boat, self-sufficient autonomous communities. If we're going to compare this concept to our lecture number 1, this clearly shows the growth on how the civilization and individuals evolve when it comes to um, survival and socialization skills. Since the barangay is self-sufficient and autonomous communities, they can strive and work for a common goal. Okay, so from the foods to their shelters to the resources, they can get it on their own as a barangay or as a group compared to our lecture number 1. The civilizations before were afar from the barangays during the Spanish regime. So the Spanish regime was considered as the birth of modern science and technology in the Philippines. And then religious orders had great influence because of Catholicism. So if we're going to break down some of those influence brought to us by the Spanish regime, we have number one, politics. So for politics, I have shared here four. Let's start here first with reduction. When we say reduction, pagbabawas, di ba? Reduction meaning to say because during the time of the Spanish or the Spanish era, only those who are Spaniards with the Spanish blood or half Spanish, half Filipino, the Principalias, yung mayayamang Pilipino, they are the only ones who can live or settle near the poblasyon or yung pinakabayan. Okay? And of course, kapag sinabi natin poblasyon during those times, rather, the church, which plays a big role when it comes to Catholicism or when it comes to religion, is located actually in the poblasyon. So if you're going to notice, diba, yung mga barangay sa atin, kung nasaan yung yung mga places sa atin, kung nasaan yung poblasyon, andun yung sinaunang simbahan. Okay? So reduction happens because if you're not wealthy enough, if you don't have any Spanish blood, if you are not a Principalia or a rich Filipino, then therefore you don't have any rights to live near the church in the poblacion. So you will be deported. Okay, you will be deported into the provinces, rural areas. And since you are practicing your religion, you have to travel far from your home going to the bayan. Kaya siya tinawag na reduction. Okay? Then we have the cabezas de barangay, or when you say cabezas de barangay, the head of the barangay, the pinuno. So I have here some examples. You have the datus of the Mindanao, 1900s. Then you also have the tribute tax. Okay, from the word tax, di ba? Sa pilitang pagbabayad. If you cannot pay the Spaniards or for your contribution tax, you have to do labor. Okay, and then one form of that is the polo e servicio. Sa pilitang paggagawa. So that is for politics. Number two, when it comes to education. Educación. Okay. So we have here two of the most prestigious universities that we have now. We have the one brought to us by the Dominicans, University of Santo Tomas. Then we also have this one is the old Ateneo de Manila. Okay, before they transferred to Quezon City. So the Dominicans brought to us University of Santo Tomas, the oldest university or Catholic university in Asia. Then you have Ateneo de Manila brought to us by the Jesuits. So when we say Dominicans and Jesuits, these are groups of priests. Okay. And then primary education was mainly religious in nature. So when we say primary education, the lower levels. Kaya nga, di ba, when you went to a Catholic school, most of the time you have prayers before class, prayers after class. You have prayers in between class. And then you have your rosary. Then you have prayers before the meal and then after the meal. So Filipinos before were trained to practice that kind of cycle. Then we have in the field of medicine. Okay, for the field of medicine, we have here, also this one is UST, which started the School of Medicine and Pharmacy in 1871. Excuse me. And then one of the most famous graduates of this university was Leon Maria Guerrero, or also considered as the father of the Philippine pharmacy. Then in the field of agriculture, so may contribution din ng Spaniards in the field of agriculture. Philippine exportation started to increase in 1789 to Asian shipping. And then 1829, agricultural production accelerated since the Philippines is very rich when it comes to agricultural resources. 1887, Manila School of Agriculture was established, and then 2 years after that, the Manila School of Agriculture was opened. During those times, even up to now, there are a lot of countries that visits or studies here in the Philippines just to learn the system of how um, agriculture works in our country. Okay, so hopefully hindi rin tayo maiwan since sila yung nagpupunta sa atin para matuto, but parang ang nangyayari is opposite, 'di ba? Sila yung natututo, sila yung nag-a-advance, tayo nagtuturo, we do not advance at all. Okay, so that's it for the Spanish regime. Let's now go to the American regime. Okay, for the American regime, it was marked as the rapid advancement of science and technology in the Philippines. Contributing factors: encouragement and support of the government for an extensive public education system, compared to the Spanish regime, wherein they favor the principalias or the maharlikas or the pure Spanish blood. For the Americans, they introduced to us the public education system, so public schools. And then scholarship grants also in the field of science and engineering, organization and establishment of science research agencies. We're going to talk more about that in our lecture number 3 about those different establishments when it comes to science and research. Then establishment of science-based public services, also more of that in lecture number 3. Okay. So specifically, the following activities paved the way for the development of science and technology in different sectors of the country. Number 1, secularized public education. Okay. When we say secularize meaning separate from religious or spiritual connection or influences. Kaya nga tayo, di ba, when we say public schools, they are secular, they are not uh, they are not ordered to follow a certain religion or a certain belief. That's the meaning of secularize. So wala tayong public school na named after the santo or the saints, diba? Unless the place is was named after a saint, okay? Diba? Saint Raphael Elementary School kasi Saint Raphael yung lugar. Okay? But directly under the name of a saint, diba? Parang wala naman. The Department of Public Instruction was established which offer free primary education but using English as the medium. Since this is the American regime, okay, they want to teach Filipinos how to speak their own dialect. And then the Philippine Normal School, or what we now know known as the Philippine Normal University, serves as a training ground for Filipino teachers. And then advanced training abroad was availed by qualified Filipinos since they brought to us grantees, research grantees, or scholarship programs. And then the demand for professional education increased. So UP, or University of Philippines, was not able to handle this increasing demand. This made private education as an alternative. So they offered as public school system, but with the demand, since marami na ang gustong makapag-aral or marami na yung may kakayahang mag-aral, most of the public schools cannot handle the population of those incoming students. So this made private education an alternative. So the Private School Act was enacted in 1917. When you say the Private School Act, so the Private School Act of 1917, it is an act making the inspection and recognition of private schools and colleges obligatory for the Secretary of Public Instruction and for other purposes. Meaning to say, They have to bid the private schools, either secondary, LM, or tertiary. They have to bid by the standards or the general standards given to them by the public or by the Secretary of Public Instruction. They have to follow certain rules in order for them to function as a private school or a private university. Okay, just like Department of Education and CHED, or Commission in Higher Education. Okay, so that's it for our lesson number 2. Okay, so before I end this discussion or lecture, I have here a quotation by Coco Chanel. Sabi niya, be who you are, not who the world wants you to be. Okay, be who you are, not who the world wants you to be. I'm going to explain this. I'm going to share my insight about this feedback on our conference this week. And also, I'm going to ask you what will be your insight or what are your insights in this quotation, specifically if you can relate it to our lecture number 2. So, Coco Chanel, be who you are, not who the world wants you to be. Okay, so that's it for our lecture number 2. I'm going to see you again for our lecture number 3 next week. Goodbye, thank you, and God bless.